They called me 4 times in 2 minutes. I was mid-presentation, our biggest client of the year. When I saw Mom flash again, I stepped into the hallway. "You need to come home right now," she said. Her tone was clipped, urgent. "It's important, Emily." I'm Emily Carter, 32, senior analyst. The one who never ignores an emergency. I left my laptop open. Slides half finished, heart hammering through every red light. Dad's heart condition, Mom's diabetes. Something awful, I thought. But their cars were in the driveway. No ambulance, no flashing lights. Mom opened the door, hair perfect, voice colder than air. "From now on, you'll hand over your bonuses to your sister." Dad muted the TV. "She's struggling. Do your duty." It wasn't an emergency, it was a transaction. I stood there, still gripping my keys. The word urgent echoed in my skull. This was the emergency? My sister's rent? "Emily," Mom said, "don't make this difficult." I laughed, quiet, stunned. "You called me out of work. For this?" Her eyes didn't soften. Dad leaned forward. "You've done well. It's time to give back." Give back. As if success meant servitude. Chelsea had dropped out twice, burned through 4 jobs. And somehow I was the one who owed her. The golden child with hollow hands. "I said no," I repeated. Dad slammed his beer down. "Ungrateful." Mom's face twisted. "After everything we've done for you?" They meant after raising you, after doing the bare minimum, after molding you into our provider. I walked out, shaking. By the time I reached Pasadena, 19 texts were waiting. "Mom told me what you said. You're heartless. I need 11,000 or I'll be homeless." The same number repeated like a curse. 11,000. Half my savings. Half my peace. I typed one sentence. "Don't text again." But the night didn't let me rest. I kept replaying every moment. Every time Mom said, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Every birthday Chelsea ruined with tears she rehearsed. Every compliment that ended with, "You're so lucky, Emily." Lucky. That word tasted bitter now. Lucky to work 60 hours. Lucky to be their insurance policy. Until midnight. Another buzz. Another lie. "Maya, we've been in an accident. Dad's in critical condition. Please send $11,000 for the hospital." My throat closed. The same number. The same script. Even fear had a price tag. They didn't raise me. They invested in me. And wanted returns. The messages kept coming. Each one louder, more desperate, more manipulative. "Dad's in critical condition. They won't treat him without money. Please, Emily, $11,000 right now." The number again. The same number. I froze in my kitchen, phone glowing like an alarm. My heart said run. My head said check. I called Riverside Community first. "Robert Carter, car accident maybe an hour ago." The nurse typed. Paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. No patient by that name." I tried another hospital. Then another. Nothing. No Robert Carter anywhere. By the 4th call, my pulse had gone still. They lied. They used death as a password to my savings. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me turned off, like a switch. I opened my laptop. 1:03 a.m. Bank accounts, insurance, investments. I downloaded every statement, every record. Proof that my life was mine. 200 a.m. I froze my credit cards. Filed for new passwords. Changed my phone number. 300 a.m. I emailed HR in Barcelona. Subject line, transfer acceptance. The position I'd ignored for a year, now my escape plan. 4 a.m. I contacted a real estate agent, listed my condo, scheduled a meeting to sell my car. By sunrise, my mind was clear. No shaking, no tears. Just clarity. I packed 2 suitcases, a carry-on, and a folder labeled Freedom. At 8:03, I stood at the bank when doors opened, transferred every dollar into a new account. No joint access. No traceable link. By 9:02, I was driving to LAX with my windows down. No music. Just silence loud enough to breathe in. I remembered the first time they offered the Barcelona role. Mom had said, "Don't go too far, Chelsea needs you." So I stayed. I thought family meant proximity. Now I knew. It meant chains. At the terminal, my hands trembled. Not from fear, but release. One boarding pass. One way. No return address. At 11:30, my flight lifted off. I didn't look back. Didn't send a final text. Didn't explain. Let them wonder. Let them call it betrayal. I called it survival. When the wheels left California soil, I realized something strange. I wasn't running from them. I was returning to myself. The seatbelt light blinked off. I opened the window shade. The sky looked like forgiveness. When the plane touched down in Barcelona, the air smelled like citrus and rain. Announcements echoed in Catalan. For the first time, no one knew my name. And that anonymity felt holy. I stepped onto foreign ground. Heart steady, future wide open. If love was real, why did it need routing numbers? Barcelona smelled like sea salt and espresso. The city hummed in a language my pain didn't understand. For weeks, I spoke only in smiles and silence. Work came fast. My new office overlooked the Mediterranean. No one there called me selfish. No one asked for my paycheck. Then one morning, 92 missed calls, 67 texts, 4 emails. The sender: Carter Family Legal Services. A Gmail address, not a firm. Subject line: theft of family assets. The body was chaos. Legal consequences. Financial abuse. Report to court immediately. No letterhead, no citations, no shame. I read it twice, strangely calm. Then I opened my banking app. My money was there. All of it. Relief slid through me like sunlight through blinds. They hadn't touched a thing. They just wanted to scare me back. Next came the voicemails. Mom's voice, cold and clipped. Emily, stop this nonsense and call us immediately. Then Dad: your mother's having a breakdown because of you. 6 from Chelsea, swinging between sobs and threats. I deleted them all. Every single one. Then I laughed. Out loud. Alone in my tiny kitchen. Tiles cool beneath my bare feet. Sea wind pushing the balcony curtains. That laughter felt dangerous. It sounded like a lock finally clicking open. The sound of a woman unclenching. I made coffee and stepped outside. Barcelona glittered like a promise. Boats winked in the harbor, gulls scribbling across the sky. They could forge fear, guilt, emergencies. They couldn't fake control anymore. Not here, not now. Days passed. The messages slowed. Silence returned, and it belonged to me. But freedom has an echo. It asks hard questions. Why did I ever believe they loved me well? Because I was trained to earn affection, to confuse obedience with care, silence with peace, money with love. On the metro home, I watched strangers. Bodies swaying, lives separate, no claims, nobody asking for my balance. I exhaled, like leaving a church. I walked the harbor path at sunset. Fishermen mended nets. Children chased foam along the stones. This, I thought, is what family should sound like. The air smelled of salt and diesel. The water burned gold under a falling sun. Every ripple looked like closure. My jacket snapped in the wind. I told the sea a secret. You don't owe them anything anymore. A week later, a real letter arrived. Letterhead. Bar number. Polished threats. Wrongful withholding of support funds. I forwarded it to my attorney. He called laughing. They have no case, he said. They're hoping you'll panic and pay. I watched the horizon soften to blue. I didn't feel guilty for being safe. I felt new. I turned back toward home. Heart steady. Address unknown. I didn't slam the door. I erased the address. It started with a letter. Cream envelope. Familiar handwriting. No return address. Just my mother's looping cursive. I almost threw it away. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I opened it with shaking hands. 8 pages. Front and back. A masterpiece of guilt. Page 1. The history of my ingratitude. Page 2. Every meal they ever paid for. Page 3. Chelsea's pain, measured in dollars. By page 6, they were rewriting our family. They called my independence financial cruelty. They called my silence emotional abuse. And then came the final paragraph. If you send us $50,000, we can rebuild this family. Otherwise, I'd regret this forever. I read it twice. Then I started to laugh. The same kind of laugh that once frightened me. The one that meant I was done. I fed the pages into my office shredder. One by one. The hum of the blades sounded holy. White confetti poured into the bin, like snowfall over a grave. For every shredded line, a piece of their control disintegrated. I watched until nothing was left. Then I poured coffee, sat on the floor, and breathed in peace. For 32 years, they'd trained me to apologize for existing. Every choice had come with a price tag. Every act of love, a receipt. But that morning, I realized something simple. You can't buy love from people who only sell conditions. I called my therapist. I just shredded a letter, I said. She wanted $50,000 to fix our relationship. My voice didn't shake. What do you feel right now? She asked. Nothing, I said, or maybe relief. That's not nothing, she told me. That's freedom. That word lingered long after the call. Freedom, not the escape kind, the earned kind. I walked to the beach that evening. Tourists laughed in the surf. A couple argued about ice cream flavors. Real problems. Normal problems. I dug my toes into the sand. The sea was cold, honest. It didn't ask me for anything. Behind me, the city glowed alive. Not a single light belonged to my past. I whispered to the waves. This is what survival sounds like. And maybe for the first time ever, I didn't feel like someone's daughter. I felt like myself. The tide rolled higher, washing my footprints into nothing. Every mark they left, gone. Like I'd never walked that path at all. I smiled at the water and thought of the girl who used to beg to be loved. She was gone too, finally resting. The wind caught my hair, and the city lights flickered like forgiveness. They called it betrayal. I called it beginning. 5 years later, I woke to the sound of rain on glass. Barcelona rain. Soft, insistent, cleansing. Miguel was making coffee in the kitchen. Our daughter, Luna, was stacking wooden blocks on the floor. The sound of her laughter filled the apartment like sunlight. Sometimes I still think about the girl I used to be. The one who mistook obedience for love. The one who believed silence kept families whole. She doesn't live here anymore. Here, mornings smell like espresso and cinnamon. Bills get paid because I earned them. Nobody demands explanations or access codes. When Luna tugs at my sleeve and asks for a story, I tell her about courage, about choosing yourself before the world tells you not to. I don't mention my parents. She doesn't need to inherit my ghosts. Last week, a letter came from California. No return address, just handwriting I'll never forget. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I dropped it into the recycling bin, right between grocery ads and pizza flyers. Some goodbyes don't need punctuation. In therapy, I learned that forgiveness isn't always about letting them back in. Sometimes it's just letting yourself leave. I don't hate them anymore. Hate keeps you tethered. Indifference is freedom. Luna calls from the window. Mom, the sun's back! She's right. Light breaks through the storm. I watch her dance in the living room. Barefoot, fearless, whole. And I make a quiet promise. She will never have to buy love to earn it. Miguel kisses my shoulder. And for a moment, the world feels quiet again. Not empty, just peaceful. I glance at the skyline. The city glows gold and alive. A life I built. A life I own. No one can claim it. No one can take it. Because peace isn't given. It's claimed. If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments, what did freedom look like for you?
I stepped into the lobby of Methodist Hospital just after noon, my badge still clipped to my blazer from the layover rounds I'd led that morning in Seattle. The air was sterile, humming with the rhythm of machines and faint urgency. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Not Delphine, not Russell, not Silas. I wasn't even supposed to know. Rachel, a friend from med school, called me after seeing Silas's name come through the ICU roster. He coded twice, she said. Stabilized now, but you should know. Know what I'd wondered, that my family still didn't see me as family. I walked to the nurse's desk, gave Silas's name, and waited. The nurse looked up, hesitated, then tilted her head. Sorry, are you the chief doctor from Seattle? I nodded once. Her voice, softened eyes widening with the recognition I never received at home. I thought I saw you in the Westline Review. You wrote that policy paper before I could respond. I caught movement in the corner of the waiting area. Delphine scrolling through her phone like it was a shield. Russell, arms crossed, looking at me the way he used to inspect rookies on patrol, unimpressed. Neither of them stood. Silas's room was just behind a glass door. The nurse opened it for me, and for a second I thought about walking away. But I stepped in. He was conscious barely, hooked to monitor's wires blooming from his chest. He turned his head, blinked once. Didn't speak. I asked the nurse for the vitals update, reviewed his notes, and signed off on his care as visiting consultant. Not because I had to, but because I could. No one said thank you. No one asked why I came. They never did. My mind slipped backward without permission 7 years earlier. Silas's birthday party. I remember the crunch of patio gravel under my shoes and the faint taste of ginger ale in a wine glass handed to me like a prop. The house was crowded aunts in pastel suits, cousins passing babies, everyone too loud, too close. My chair was by the window, half sun, half shadow. I wasn't in any of the framed photos that lined the table. I checked. Dad stood for a toast, crisp button-down, tucked, too tight eyes already shining. To Silas, he said, "Our pride and joy. Every family's got one." Then a pause, a smirk, and every family's got a waist, too. Laughter, honest, unfiltered. Even Aunt Gwen dabbed her eyes like it was the best joke she'd heard in years. I smiled too. Small, controlled. My mother gave me that look tight lips, slight tilt of her head. Don't ruin this. So I didn't. I never did. That same week, I had published my first co-authored research paper in the Journal of Health Equity. The congratulations came from strangers, colleagues, my supervisor. Flowers, emails, handshakes. But not from home. Not even a text. That was the week I stopped expecting applause from people who never learned to pronounce my ambition without flinching. And that's when the paper came, folded once, neatly placed on the kitchen table. It was the summer after my second year at UT Austin, the kind of August that made the air feel heavier than my thoughts. I'd come home for 3 days, just long enough to do laundry, breathe familiar air, and pretend the house still felt like mine. Dinner that night was too formal. Linen napkins, real silverware. My mother lit the tall candles she usually reserved for holidays. No one said why. After dessert, Delphine smiled and said, "Can we talk for a minute, honey?" I followed them into the kitchen expecting small talk, or maybe a passive dig about my weight or posture. Instead, the table was already set with papers. A single page on top, clean and centered. My name printed at the top in block letters. "We've been talking." She began folding her hands like she was offering a blessing. "You've been working so hard, and we're concerned. Medical school is so competitive. So stressful. There are other options." Russell leaned forward. "There's a 2-year program at the community college, medical assistant. It's still healthcare, good hours, practical, woman-friendly." I stared at the paper. It was already filled out. Only the signature line was blank. "If you choose this route," Delphine added, "we'll cover your rent. You can stay home. Save money. And if I don't," Russell didn't blink, "then we can't support choices we don't believe in." No yelling, no slammed fists. Just a door offered open, then quietly closed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked to my room and began to pack. 10 minutes later, Delphine appeared in the doorway. "You're really choosing strangers over your own family." I didn't answer. My suitcase was small. It held 2 sets of scrubs, a worn pair of sneakers, and a cardboard box I kept under my bed. Inside were pieces of me they never displayed: honor roll certificates, a ribbon from the state science fair, a laminated newspaper clipping about my tutoring work. I left behind the framed photo Delphine had picked for my nightstand back when they still believed in who I might become. Russell stood at the front door. "You don't know what you're walking into," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'll earn who I become." The porch light flickered as I stepped into the night. I didn't look back. I just placed the box on my lap, shut the cab door, and let their silence follow me like a second shadow. Starting over wasn't dramatic. It was clinical. Early shifts, late nights, a fridge that hummed louder than my phone ever did. I kept my head down and applied for every scholarship that didn't require a family recommendation. I told myself I didn't need backup, just bandwidth. There was one I'd pinned all my hopes to: the Whitaker grant. Only 2 spots nationwide. I spent weeks on the essay Health Literacy in Underserved Communities case studies proposed impact. My advisor called it quiet brilliance. I submitted it with trembling fingers and a borrowed printer. 3 months later, I got the email. "We regret to inform you." It didn't break me, just made me tired. Weeks passed. Then, while digging through my inbox for something unrelated, I found a reply I hadn't seen dated the same week I applied. "Thank you for considering Amira Vance. After further discussion, she has chosen to withdraw her application. Best Delphine Vance. No subject line, no draft folder. Just her name sent clean and final." I didn't call. What would I have said? She would have called it a misunderstanding, a technical error. "I thought you changed your mind." I stared at the screen until the edges blurred, then printed a copy for my file. Not to confront her, but to remember. Not long after, during a guest lecture, a professor mentioned the Whitaker finalists. One stood out, she said. A project on healthcare access. Beautiful proposal. The recipient, Silas Vance. The name landed like a flat note. I stayed after class pretending to pack up slowly. Asked if we could see the winning essays for reference. She smiled and handed me a hard copy. The title was mine. The language was softer, a few metaphors I'd never use, but the bones were familiar. Identical structure. Even the closing quote, my quote, was there slightly reworded. I remembered the night Silas stopped by my studio apartment just before the deadline. "I need help brainstorming," he said. "You're good at these things." I gave him my outline, even shared an early paragraph. "Just for structure," he promised. I pressed the page, flat took a photo, and slipped it into my folder. I didn't report it. I didn't ask for credit. I just learned to keep better records. Some betrayals don't show up as bruises. They come as scholarships you never got to claim. I didn't lose faith in myself, but I stopped expecting truth from anyone who had something to gain from my silence. So I kept building quietly. One paper, one rotation, one semester at a time. Until the day I walked back into a hospital I never meant to return to, and someone called me doctor before they called me daughter. The hallway outside Silas's ICU suite was quiet in that clinical way, full of soft beeps and tension that floats just beneath the fluorescent lights. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I didn't owe them that. Delphine sat near the wall, her hands folded neatly around her phone like it was prayer. Russell was perched in the corner, arms crossed, legs wide, still performing authority, even when no one asked for it. Neither looked up as I approached. Dr. Vance, the nurse, said, stepping forward. "This way." I nodded. Her voice was bright, her posture respectful, like she'd read my name somewhere that mattered. Maybe she had. When I entered the room, I didn't pause. I glanced at the monitors, scanned the intake notes, reviewed his chart. Silas looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. The kind of pale that doesn't come from low iron, but from being too long in a room where no one opens a window. He blinked once when he saw me, but said nothing. The nurse hovered near the door. "We adjusted his meds this morning. BP's still unstable, but no arrhythmia since noon." I nodded again, jotting a quick note into the tablet. "We'll keep him on this course. Continue to monitor oxygen saturation." "Of course, doctor." Doctor. Not sister, not daughter. Just the name I gave myself when theirs stopped meaning anything. As I stepped back from the bed, Delphine entered behind me. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just looked past me, her gaze fixed on the IV drip like I wasn't 3 feet away. The nurse hesitated, then gestured. "Dr. Vance is consulting with our team today." Delphine didn't acknowledge her. "Or me." "That's not my daughter," she said, flat as marble. The nurse blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought she's from Seattle." Delphine's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It just landed like a gavel. I didn't respond. I just turned, slightly handed the chart back, and asked the nurse if she needed anything clarified. She shook her head, then added softly, "I read your paper last semester. Westline Review. We had to study it in health policy." I gave her a faint smile. The kind you offer when gratitude feels too dangerous. Behind me, Delphine's hands tightened around her purse. Her lips pressed thin, but she didn't say a word. I finished my notes, instructed the staff to notify me of any status changes, and stepped out. Russell looked up for the first time. His mouth opened slightly like he might ask something, but nothing came out. The hallway felt warmer now, like the building itself was watching. The silence I used to drown in now moved behind me like a shadow I'd outrun, and by the time I reached the elevator, I already knew what her call would sound like. The call came just before midnight. One missed ring, then a voicemail. Delphine's voice was softer than I remembered, tentative, like she was trying on humility for the first time in decades. "I know you're busy. I just wanted to say I was wrong. Maybe we could talk. Just coffee." I didn't reply. But the next morning I found myself sitting across from her in a cafe near the hospital, hands wrapped around a cup that had long since gone cold. "You look well," she said, eyes scanning me like I was someone else's daughter in her coat. "Busy," I replied, "but well." She nodded, smiled faintly. "Silas was surprised to see you." "We all were. It's impressive what you've done." There it was, the compliment that always came before the ask. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said, finally leaning in, "but we were wondering if there's any way you could help transfer Silas to your hospital. Better care, smoother recovery. You'd be overseeing it. It would mean so much." I set the cup down slowly. "I don't handle admissions," I said. "But with your title, your connections, I'm not going to make that call." Delphine's smile flickered. Of course, she said quickly, tucking her hands beneath the table. I just thought, thank you for meeting me, I said, already standing. She blinked like she hadn't prepared for the version of this conversation where I left first. I didn't give her time to finish the sentence. Back at the hotel, a thick envelope waited at the front desk. No return address. Just my name in Delphine's unmistakable cursive. Inside was a copy of a visa application sponsorship section filled out under my name, my credentials, my signature. Except I'd never seen it before. She'd used me. Again, I didn't call. I didn't text. I simply typed a response to the issuing office. I do not consent. I was not consulted. I signed it as Dr. Amira Vance, printed 2 copies and placed one in my witness file. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic fallout, just a line she wouldn't cross again, and a silence she could no longer weaponize. The invitation came through a colleague, a small private dinner for women in medicine, no microphones, no panels, just stories and soup. I almost declined. Applause still made me itch. But this wasn't public. It felt safe, close. So I went. The restaurant was tucked into a converted house off Capitol Hill. Low ceilings, warm lighting, quiet chatter between women in scrubs and soft sweaters. I hung my coat and took a seat at the far end of the table. That's when I saw her. Eliza, she said, standing slowly. Her voice hadn't changed, just softened. A cousin on my mother's side. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade, but I recognized the eyes. She sat across from me, smiling like she wasn't sure if this counted as a reunion. I read your piece, she said. Didn't know whether to be proud or worried. I tilted my head, worried for who she didn't answer. Not right away. We talked about the easy things, Seattle Weather Hospital hours, her daughter's art classes. Then, between the salad and dessert, her tone shifted. You know, she said gently, I always knew you were different. Not difficult. Just too strong for them. I didn't respond. They never wanted to admit it, she continued. But you scared them, not in a bad way. Just, you moved things. And they liked things still. She stirred her tea. You made Silas look small. Not by what you did, just by being who you were. And they never thought you'd fight back. They didn't think you had it in you. It landed harder than anything Delphine had ever said to my face. I nodded once. Eliza didn't offer an apology. She didn't need to. What she gave me was rarer truth, without spin, without performance. Later, I walked home alone through streets slick with late rain. Her words echoed against the sidewalk. You scared them. I turned the phrase over in my head until it lost its edges. It wasn't an insult. It was an answer. And by the time I reached my door, I no longer needed to be sorry for taking up space they were never willing to share. I almost didn't say yes to the summit. The email sat in my inbox for weeks, buried beneath patient notes and department updates. But something about the title Healing Beyond the Hospital stuck with me. Maybe because I'd spent years learning that some wounds don't show up on scans. The room wasn't grand. No stage lights or velvet chairs, just folding tables, a podium, and rows of women in sensible flats and tired eyes. When they called my name, I stepped up without notes. I used to think love looked like support, I began. That the people who raised you would want to see you succeed. But I learned some only cheer when you follow the script they wrote. Silence, not hostile, just listening. When you grow beyond their expectations, when you build something without their permission, it's not always met with pride. Sometimes it's met with fear. I paused. But survival is a kind of success too. I stopped asking to be invited to the table when I realized I could build my own. Applause rose slowly, like people were giving themselves permission to feel it. I left through the side exit. No business cards, no photos, just the quiet satisfaction of telling the truth without asking anyone to believe it. 2 days later, the blog post went live. No headshot, no backstory. Just the headline, When Family Doesn't Show Up, She Builds Her Own Seat. I didn't share it, but my name found its way into the comments, not as someone's daughter, as someone who made her own name matter. She caught me near the coffee cart at the back of the conference hall, clutching her notebook like it might float away. I know this is strange, she said, cheeks flushed, but your article, it felt like my story. I smiled, not the kind I'd worn for years out of politeness, but something real. Then write yours, I told her, louder than I did. She nodded slowly like she was tucking the sentence into her coat pocket for later. That night back home, I pulled out an old journal from the bottom drawer of my desk. The leather was cracked, the corners curled. I hadn't touched it in years. I flipped past the first few entries, the ones written in dorm rooms and on buses between exams and tears, pages full of questions of wondering when they'd see me, if I'd ever earn my way back into a story they seemed so determined to write without me. I turned to a blank page, not to prove anything, just to remember. The pen moved slower than it used to, but the words felt steady. I said my name first, not to them, to myself. The phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I let it ring once then twice. On the third, I answered. Delphine's voice came through soft and wavering. I know things weren't easy. But maybe, if there's still compassion in you, your brother. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. I listened, not out of obligation, but as someone who had learned the power of not needing to reply. When she paused for breath, I pressed mute. Then I returned to the page and wrote the line I needed to see. The leaves had started turning near Volunteer Park, that slow golden fade that made the sidewalks look softer. I passed a family posing beneath a canopy of red maples, laughter camera clicks, jackets being zipped, names being called. I didn't flinch. I didn't wonder what it would have been like to be in a photo like that. I just kept walking. Back home, I slipped off my shoes, made tea I didn't drink, and opened the drawer in my hallway cabinet. Inside was the nameplate I had made the week I became Chief Simple Brushed Steel Clean Lettering. Dr. Amira Vance. I ran my fingers across the engraving, the weight of it both heavier and lighter than I remembered. They never sent flowers, never clapped from the front row, never even said the title. But I did. And it turns out, I was the only one who ever needed to. I closed the drawer gently, not to hide it, but to keep it. Then I stood in the stillness, let it fill the corners of the room. They never said my name until everyone else did. And now I say it loud enough for myself. The casserole hadn't even cooled. I remember that detail because I'd been so proud of it. Hand-peeled potatoes cream from the market down on Willow Street, baked slow and steady in the same dish my grandmother used. I still remember the shape of the brown edges curling at the corners just the way she liked it. It was my first dinner in the house I bought myself. Not rented, not borrowed, not a hand-me-down from someone else's idea of where I belonged. I saved for 5 years, cut every extra, packed my own lunch through 2 promotions. I did everything the right way, quietly, carefully. And now I was hosting the very people who always doubted I could. My parents were due at 6. I set the table with cloth napkins and the plates I'd gotten on clearance from a little antique shop outside of Corvallis, the blue ones with tiny hand-painted birds on the rim. Each seat had a name card, simple printed on cardstock and laminated at work on my break. I placed Dad at the head mom to his right, and Marla, my older sister, across from me like it was some soft-lit truce I'd arranged after a war we never declared. I even lit candles, cinnamon and pine. Just enough to make the place feel like home, not like a showroom. By 6:20, I had rechecked everything 3 times. The roast was resting, the salad was crisp, and my skirt, which I hardly ever wore, was freshly steamed. I remember smoothing it down more than once, the way nervous hands do when there's nothing else left to fix. At 6:32, tires crunched over gravel outside. My heart kicked a little. The first to step inside was Marla. She didn't knock, just opened the door and said, "Smells like food," without looking at me. She wore those suede boots she always bragged about, expensive, impractical. They tracked faint dust over the floors I'd mopped that morning. Dad followed. He gave a nod, not quite a greeting. His eyes didn't land on me, but rather moved across the crown, molding the ceiling corners, the family photo above the mantel, like he was inspecting a rental. "This place has good bones," he said eventually. "Feels like it should belong to everyone." I laughed, though I didn't find it funny. "It's cozy, I think." Mom entered last. She didn't speak. Her fingers grazed the picture frame on the mantel, one of us from when I was 10. Her eyes lingered on it like it was unfamiliar. We sat. The silverware clinked lightly. The salad remained untouched. Marla scrolled through her phone under the table. Dad asked how I could afford hardwood floors. He said it not like a compliment, but a suspicion. You know he added a house this size is a lot for one person. It's manageable, I said, and took a sip of wine I no longer wanted. No one asked about my promotion. By the time dessert came, a warm apple crumble with oat topping, I was nearly desperate for someone to say anything kind. I remember smiling too hard. I told them the crust was homemade. I said it twice. Dad didn't respond. He folded his napkin slowly, precisely like a ritual. Then he looked at me finally, and I saw something shift in his jaw. I recognized it. I'd seen it when I asked to apply for a college out of state, when I bought my first car without calling for permission. We've discussed it, he said. This house should come back to the family. I blinked. I'm sorry. What Mom nodded, eyes fixed on the wall. You've done well, Celeste, but it's too much house for someone like you. It's time to refocus. My hands trembled under the table. Marla leaned back, arms crossed. It's not personal, she said. Then she stood, and when she came back, she was holding at my suitcase. The green one I'd used when I moved to college. It was already packed. We gathered your essentials, she added, just to make things smoother. I tried to speak. My mouth wouldn't open. My voice curled up inside my chest and refused to come out. I'm the legal owner, I whispered finally. Dad's smile was thin. We'll sort that. No one raised their voice. No one cried. But something far louder had already happened. I picked up my phone and keys and laid them gently on the table right next to my untouched wine glass. Then I walked out. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been for October. The suitcase thumped in the back of my trunk as I drove with no destination in mind. Each turn on the road echoed like a question I hadn't prepared to answer. I didn't know it then, but the real theft didn't happen that night. It started long before the casserole cooled. I didn't drive far. I couldn't. 10, maybe 12 miles outside of Harbor Falls, I pulled into a small gas station, the kind that still sold disposable cameras and cinnamon air fresheners hanging behind the counter. The overhead light flickered like it was tired of staying on. I parked under it, engine off, hands still locked around the steering wheel as if I needed it to anchor me to something solid. The suitcase thudded quietly with each movement, a dull reminder in the trunk. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. My voice was quieter than I expected. This is Celeste. A pause, then a voice, cheerful, too cheerful. Hi, Ms. Whitmore, this is Chelsea from Cascade State Mortgage. I'm calling to confirm a request that came through this weekend regarding changes to your mortgage account. My stomach tightened. What kind of changes? Well, she said, her tone shifting slightly. There was a request to add 2 co-borrowers to your existing loan and to update the primary contact to someone named Marla Whitmore. The submission raised some red flags on our end, mostly because it didn't come through the secure portal and it didn't match your typical access pattern. My heart was pounding now, but my voice stayed even. I didn't authorize any changes. I haven't shared access with anyone. Another pause. That's what we figured, she said. We haven't processed anything. You're still listed as the sole legal owner, no co-borrowers, no secondary contacts. But for your protection, we've temporarily locked the account and logged the attempted change. My mouth was dry. Do you have the names they used? Yes. Edward and Marla Whitmore. I didn't respond right away. It wasn't shock that kept me quiet. It was the strange, steady realization that I wasn't surprised. I thanked her requested written documentation and ended the call. The car was silent again, except for the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. I stared out at the empty parking lot, my reflection faint in the windshield. They weren't reacting to anything. They had been planning this. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment family dysfunction. It was a blueprint, a long one. And I, trying to please them, trying to serve casserole and earn a smile, had walked right into it. I reached for my phone again, not to call anyone, but to scroll through old photos. Ones taken just weeks ago. Me standing on the porch with the sold sign holding keys, smiling like I believed the house was mine. It was mine. Still was. But they didn't think I'd fight for it. And they certainly didn't think I'd document everything. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call had already changed the outcome. Because now I wasn't confused. I was aware. And awareness, I would learn, is the first real weapon. It was still early the next morning when I drove back toward my house. I hadn't slept, not really. I dozed off in the car for maybe an hour before the cold in my spine reminded me I was no longer welcome in the place I paid for. But I needed something papers, chargers, even just a sweater. Something familiar. As I pulled onto my street, the sun was just starting to rise. The houses on my block were lit with soft porch lights, windows framed with curtains that hadn't changed overnight. But mine was different. The porch light had been swapped. The warm amber bulb I'd chosen was now a sterile white-blue glow that felt more like a dentist's office than a home. The potted rosemary I'd grown from seed was gone. In its place was a plastic fern in a chipped planter I'd never seen before. I parked across the street and sat for a moment just looking. The curtains were different. The blinds were drawn tightly like the house itself was hiding something. I walked up slowly, heart heavy but hands steady. I still had my copy of the key. I hadn't dared try it yesterday. I slipped it into the lock. It didn't turn. No resistance, no clunk. Just a quiet finality like the lock no longer recognized me. I pulled the key out and stared at it, and then the door opened. A woman I didn't know stood in the threshold barefoot wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. She couldn't have been more than 22. She looked me up and down with the kind of glance you use on someone who's selling magazines door to door. "Can I help you?" I swallowed. "This is my house." She raised an eyebrow. "You're Celeste." I nodded. Her face didn't change. "They told me you wouldn't be back." "Who told you Marla and Edward? Said you left voluntarily. That you were having stability issues." I felt my stomach knot, not in surprise, but in the confirmation of what I already suspected. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the hallway. My hallway. But not mine anymore. The photo wall had changed. Gone were the framed prints of Oregon coastlines I'd taken during solo hikes. In their place were stock photos of flower fields and a canvas with a quote about family. A quote I didn't believe. "I'm going to need you to leave," the girl said. I was told not to let anyone in. I stepped back without a word. There was no point in arguing with someone who wasn't even part of the play. They were just reading the script they were handed. As I turned to walk away, my heels tapped softly against the concrete, too loud in the early morning hush. Across the street, Mrs. Denham was walking her spaniel bundled in a fleece robe. "Morning, Celeste," she called, like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't just been shut out of my own life. I nodded. That was all I could manage. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment before pulling away. Inside, it was so quiet, it almost hurt. That stranger in the doorway wasn't the problem. She was just a symptom. The real issue was behind her, behind the door that no longer opened for me. The problem was how easily they'd rewritten my place in the story, and how quietly the world was prepared to let them. I spent that night on Raina's couch. She didn't ask for details, not at first. She just made a pot of peppermint tea, the kind I used to keep in my kitchen, and left it on the side table next to a folded blanket. "I'm here when you're ready," she said simply. I wasn't ready yet, but I wasn't lost either. By midnight, the apartment had gone quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat cross-legged under the throw blanket laptop open on my knees. I hadn't touched most of my old cloud folders in months. They were mostly filled with paperwork, scanned documents from closing day tax records, insurance confirmations. Things I filed out of obligation, not urgency. But one folder caught my eye. Interior cam backups. I had nearly forgotten it existed. The cameras were my idea back when I first moved in. Not for security exactly, but peace of mind. A couple small motion-activated lenses tucked near the front hallway and office enough to monitor for deliveries or in case someone tripped the breaker while I was away. They were synced to my cloud set to auto-upload clips when triggered. I hadn't reviewed them since early fall. But now? I clicked. The first video was time-stamped 2 days before the dinner. It opened with a quiet shot of the hallway, then movement. Marla standing in my office, casually opening drawers, not rifling, not searching. Just calmly removing files, flipping through them, placing them in a box already labeled in her handwriting. Another clip, my mother Diane removing my framed degree from the wall, tucking it under her arm. She took a moment to smooth the dust from the now empty space. Then my father. Edward entered last sat at my desk like he owned it. He leaned back in my chair, tested the tilt, then reached behind the monitor and unplugged the router. In his hand, he held a new device wrapped in masking tape. On it, in faded marker, was written Whitmore, Maine. They weren't trespassing. They were settling in, replacing the things I had chosen with the things they thought fit better. No panic, no rush. Just deliberate motion. Like the house had already been reassigned in their minds, and my presence at the dinner was merely a formality. I sat back, pulse thudding low behind my ribs. They hadn't expected me to notice. They didn't think I'd still have access. They thought I'd given up the moment I left the key on the table. And honestly, for a moment, I almost had. But not now. I started downloading clips, one by one. I renamed them by timestamp and saved them into a new folder. They took it. At the bottom of the folder, tucked beneath a string of footage files, was a voicemail. I didn't remember saving it. It was dated 9 days before the dinner. I hit play. Marla's voice came through flat and clear. Once she's out, change the locks. Don't let her back in. Not even for the photo albums. She'll call a lawyer, sure, but it won't stick. This is a family matter. Judges don't touch it. My throat tightened. She wasn't even angry, just efficient. Like this was an event to be managed, like I was clutter to be boxed and removed. I sat with the silence after the recording ended. Let it settle. Then I copied the voicemail, attached the first 3 video files, and emailed them to myself and to a new contact folder labeled Legal. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. I hadn't left. They had simply begun moving in before I realized I was being moved out. The next morning, I woke to Raina sitting at her tiny kitchen table, glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a small legal pad filled with names and numbers. She looked up when I entered. "You need a lawyer. Not just for the house. This is bigger now." I nodded. I knew she was right. She made a call before breakfast. By 9, we had an appointment with Joanna Kerr, a civil litigation attorney in downtown Harbor Falls. I remembered the name from a neighbor's divorce, quiet, thorough, not the type who showed up in court with a loud tie and an ego. Joanna's office was small but neat, with a row of green folders stacked with alarming symmetry. Her handshake was dry and direct. "I specialize in property disputes," she said, sliding a notepad between us. "But more often than not, the worst ones involve people with the same last name." She let that hang for a moment before continuing. I pulled out the folder I'd started the videos, the voicemail copies of my mortgage documents and deed. She scanned them quickly, her face unreadable. "This is strong," she said. "But we'll need more." I knew what she meant, and I already knew where to look. That night, back at Raina's, I opened my email archive. Years of threads and attachments. Most forgotten until I began using the search bar like a scalpel. Subject line: "Can you send over your W-2 real quick? From Edward Whitmore." Date: February 2 years ago. I remembered it. I was filing taxes late and had asked my dad if his accountant still did individual returns. He said yes, just send the documents. Another from Marla: "Need your SSN for the insurance beneficiary forms just to speed things up." At the time, it hadn't seemed strange. They were family. I'd trusted the hands reaching out to help me steady my life. Now I saw it differently. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were slowly assembling a version of me they could control on paper. "Raina," I called from across the living room. "Can you check something for me?" She joined me on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees. "Check your credit report," she said without needing to ask why. It took me 2 tries to remember my password. When the report loaded, I felt my throat go dry. 2 new inquiries. One from a major department store I hadn't shopped at in over a decade. Another from a credit card company I'd never applied to. Both submitted within the past week. Both linked to an IP address from my parents' house. I turned to Raina. She was already frowning. "This is financial fraud," she said. "This isn't emotional anymore. It's criminal." I sat very still, as if even breathing too loudly might make it worse. Joanna called that evening. I forwarded everything: the emails, the report, the application attempts. "We're filing," she said. "Emergency petition, restraining order. Lock your credit. From this point forward, don't speak with them directly. Every word goes through me." I closed my laptop and leaned back. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about proof. They'd counted on me staying quiet, staying small, but they forgot I kept receipts. The courthouse in Harbor Falls was built in 1911, brick, limestone, and symmetry. I'd passed it dozens of times and never thought I'd walk in through the front doors as anything other than a taxpayer. But on Thursday morning, I stepped through security with Joanna on my left and Raina trailing quietly behind. I carried nothing but a manila folder and my name. We waited outside the courtroom while the previous case was called. Divorce. Something about vehicles and visitation. Voices behind the double doors rose, then fell again. I pressed my palms together on my lap. Not to pray, just to stop them from shaking. This isn't about drama, Joanna said under her breath. We're here for truth. Let them perform. We'll present. When our case was called, we entered quietly. The courtroom was cold in a way that didn't come from the air, more like a stillness that demanded you choose your words carefully or not at all. My parents sat at the defendant table. My father, Edward, wore a suit that didn't fit quite the way it used to. My mother, Diane, was rigid beside him. Marla was seated apart, arms crossed, jaw-locked hair pulled into a bun that said control more than style. They didn't look at me. Joanna began with documentation. She presented the mortgage papers, the deed, the dated payoff statements. Then the videos, silent but devastating my father, replacing the router, my mother removing framed photos, Marla boxing files. Then came the voicemail. The courtroom remained quiet as Marla's voice echoed from the speaker. Once she's out, change the locks. Don't let her back in. Not even for the photo albums. Not angry. Not panicked. Just calculated. Joanna let it sit in the room before continuing. When it was their turn, my father stood first. We were trying to protect what we built, he said. This house was always meant for the family. We supported Celeste for years. Her name might be on the deed, but that was never the spirit of it. Joanna interrupted him politely but firmly. Mr. Whitmore, do you deny submitting false ownership claims to Cascade State Mortgage? I deny any criminal intent, he replied, voice tight. If she had just listened, none of this would have happened. The judge glanced over her glasses, her face unreadable. Then came Marla. She stood, cleared her throat. I was only trying to help manage the property, she said. Celeste doesn't even like hosting. It was too much house for her. She gets overwhelmed. Joanna pulled a still frame from one of the videos, Marla removing my labeled folders, tucking them into a box with her initials on the side. The judge looked up. You believed the home was yours? Marla hesitated. I believed it was shared responsibility. You're not on the deed, the judge said. Are you? No. My turn came last. I walked slowly to the stand, took the oath, sat. I didn't read a statement. I didn't bring notes. I looked directly at the judge and said, I bought that house alone. I paid every installment, handled every repair, chose every piece of furniture. They didn't just enter without permission, they began erasing me before I even left. I paused. My father replaced my internet. My sister packed my files. My mother removed my photographs, and when I resisted, they called me unstable. I let the silence linger. They didn't just try to take my house. They tried to write me out of the life I built inside it. The judge didn't speak immediately. She flipped through her notes, read something on her screen. Then finally, this court finds that Ms. Celeste Whitmore is the sole legal owner of the property in question. Furthermore, we find sufficient grounds to uphold the temporary restraining order and open formal inquiry into suspected financial misconduct and identity fraud. Edward inhaled sharply. Marla looked at the floor. My mother didn't move at all. I didn't react. Not in that room. Outside, Raina was waiting with coffee in a paper cup and an umbrella she didn't need. The sun was sharp and steady overhead. How do you feel? She asked. I looked down at the courthouse steps. My shoes were planted. My voice steady. I feel real. She smiled. Later that afternoon, I opened the email from Joanna confirming the county clerk had updated the deed. My name. My signature. My home. I closed my laptop and sat by the window in Raina's guest room watching the trees sway outside like they were nodding in quiet agreement. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. And piece by piece, it was working. The key turned harder than I remembered. It took 2 full tries and a firm grip before the lock finally gave way, like the house itself wasn't sure whether to let me in. I stepped into silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that made you listen harder than you meant to. The curtains were stiff. The air held no scent. The soft eucalyptus I used to keep near the entryway had been replaced with something sharper lavender plugins, the kind Marla liked. Artificial, unwelcome. I didn't walk room to room, not yet. I stood in the foyer for several long minutes, letting my eyes adjust to the changes. My grandmother's ceramic vase was gone from the console table. In its place, a cold silver bowl filled with glass pebbles. The kind you buy in bulk, the kind that have no memory. The first thing I did was open the windows. The second was to find every artificial scent, every plastic arrangement, every staged object, and place it in a box. I labeled it "not mine." Then I moved to the mantel. The frames were all new. Photos I'd never seen. One of my parents on their wedding day. One of Marla with her dog. None of me. Not one. It was strange to realize how thorough they'd been. They hadn't just claimed space, they'd curated a version of life that didn't include me at all. I pulled every frame down gently. I didn't shatter anything. This wasn't anger. It was correction. In the kitchen, tucked behind the silverware tray, I found something unexpected, a cream-colored envelope. My name, written in my mother's cursive. Inside was a single page. "You'll understand someday. Family decisions are complicated. You were always so headstrong, Celeste. This was about preserving what matters. One day you'll see it was necessary. No apology, no ownership, just a tidy set of excuses disguised as legacy." I took it out back, lit a match, and held the paper over the fire pit. The flame curled through each line without hesitation. When it was gone, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. That night, I started rearranging the living room. Not because it was messy, but because it didn't reflect me anymore. I unpacked my own photos. I found the seascape painting from my first trip to Cannon Beach and hung it back over the fireplace. I replaced the bowl of pebbles with the ceramic dish I'd made in a weekend pottery class, the one with the wobbly edge I used to be embarrassed by. I left it as is, imperfect, but mine. By midnight, I had reclaimed enough corners of the house that it no longer whispered their names, and as I climbed into my own bed, the sheets wrinkled the pillows familiar, I exhaled for the first time in weeks. They had rewritten the house, but I remembered the original draft, and now I was writing it back. 3 days after I moved back in, I got a text from Raina. "Brunch at my place, chosen family only. Wear something warm. I didn't bring a gift. I brought a bouquet of pine and cedar wrapped in twine I'd found in the kitchen drawer." When she opened the door, snow was beginning to collect along her porch railing. "Smells like cinnamon," I said. "It's mostly store-bought," she shrugged. "But the coffee's real." Inside, the space was alive. Her sister-in-law was laughing in the kitchen. A toddler dragged a plush bear across the floor. Jazz played low from a speaker tucked behind the coat rack. No one asked what had happened. They simply made room for me. Over cider and eggs baked in ramekins, I found myself smiling at moments I hadn't noticed in years. Tiny things like the way Raina always tilted her head before a question, or how the light from the windows made everything feel warmer than it was. This wasn't the family I was born into, but they showed up without rewriting the story. When I returned home that afternoon, the stillness didn't feel cold anymore. It felt earned. I lit a candle by the window clove and bergamot and sat at the table with a notebook I hadn't touched in months. I wrote only one sentence. The house didn't change. I did. That evening, I replaced the curtains. The ones Marla had picked were too stiff, too long. I hung my old ones instead, soft cream cotton I'd hemmed myself one slow weekend years ago. They didn't match anything else in the room, but they belonged. Later, I found the rug they had shoved in the garage. It was dusty, slightly torn at one corner. I unrolled it anyway. Underneath the hardwood was scratched, some of it from moving day, some of it from the dog I once fostered for a summer. But it was mine. Flawed, marked, and honest. I stood barefoot on the old wood and felt the quiet settle around me like a blanket. That's when I understood. Peace wasn't the silence after a storm. It was the voice you speak in when you no longer need to explain yourself. And that voice, It had my name on it. The next morning, I checked the mailbox. Mixed between utility bills and a holiday catalog was a simple envelope no return address. Inside a card with a photograph of a snow-covered cabin and one line in block print, "Freedom isn't the absence of history. It's knowing it doesn't own you anymore." I pinned it to the corkboard beside my front door, next to affirmations I had begun collecting. Things I didn't believe in fully yet, but wanted to try. That evening, I wrote a final note in my journal. They tried to take the house, but they couldn't take the woman who built it. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, not out of fear, but out of habit, and climbed into bed with the window cracked just enough to let in the night air. And for the first time in months, I slept without bracing for anything.